Commander Vera stood at the edge of the training grounds, watching her warriors practice their daily combat drills. Her 7-foot frame cast a long shadow across the sand as the twin suns of Kathar burned overhead. The natural armor plates that covered her arms and shoulders gleamed like polished stone. Each warrior who passed her bowed their heads in respect, but she could see the questions in their eyes. The same questions that had been there for 6 months now, ever since her marriage. "Commander," called out Track, one of her senior fighters. "The new recruits are ready for evaluation." Vera nodded and walked toward the circle where young Kathari warriors waited. Their natural armor was still developing, showing the dark green of youth rather than the deep black of maturity. Each one held a training sword with the proper grip, feet positioned correctly, eyes focused and ready. "Begin," she commanded. The sparring session lasted an hour. Vera corrected stances, demonstrated proper striking techniques, and evaluated each recruit's potential. This was her world, her life, her purpose. Combat was as natural to the Kathari as breathing. Their entire culture was built around strength, honor, and the warrior's way. Which made her marriage even more difficult to understand. As the training session ended, Vera noticed her younger brother Crix approaching. His armor was freshly polished, and his ceremonial sword hung at his side. Behind him walked 3 other clan leaders, their expressions serious. "Sister," Crix said, his voice carrying across the training ground. "We need to discuss something important." Vera knew what this was about before he spoke another word. It was always about the same thing these days. "Speak," she said simply. "The clan council met this morning," Crix continued. "There are concerns about your human husband. Some believe his presence weakens our standing with the other clans." The other warriors had stopped their training now, pretending to pack their equipment while listening to every word. Vera could feel their eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond. "Ben is my chosen mate," she said firmly. The marriage was approved by the council and blessed by the clan elders. "That was a political decision," said Elder Mort, one of the clan leaders behind Crix. "Earth needed our alliance, and we needed their technology. But now people are talking. They say the great commander Vera chose a soft human over a worthy Kathari warrior." Vera felt heat rising in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "Ben is worthy in his own way." "Is he?" Crix challenged. "When did you last see him hold a weapon? When has he joined our training? Where is his warrior spirit?" The questions hit harder because Vera had asked herself the same things many times. Ben was unlike any male she had ever known. While Kathari males were nearly as large and strong as females, Ben barely reached her shoulder. Where Kathari males trained daily in combat, Ben spent his time reading and studying old artifacts. "He is an archaeologist," Vera said. "His work is important." "His work is looking at old things," Crix replied. "While real warriors prepare for battle, he plays with ancient tools and broken pottery." Some of the younger warriors chuckled at this. Vera's anger flared, but before she could respond, a familiar voice called out from across the courtyard. "Vera? Is everything all right?" Ben approached the group with his usual calm stride. He was dressed in simple brown clothing, carrying a data pad and a small brush for cleaning artifacts. His dark hair was slightly messy from working in the archives, and his hands showed the careful precision of someone who spent hours handling delicate objects. The contrast between him and the armored Kathari warriors could not have been greater. "Husband," Vera said, forcing her voice to remain neutral. "We are having a discussion about clan matters." Ben looked around the circle of warriors, his intelligent eyes taking in their expressions and body language. Vera had learned that Ben noticed details that others missed, but in moments like this, she wished he would simply walk away. "Ah," Ben said with a small smile. "The discussion about whether I'm worthy of my wife." Crix stepped forward, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "Since you brought it up, human, perhaps we should settle this question properly." "How do you suggest we do that?" Ben asked, his tone remaining friendly despite the obvious threat. Combat trials, Crix declared loudly enough for all the warriors to hear. Traditional weapons, traditional rules. If you can prove yourself worthy in battle, the clan will accept you fully. A murmur ran through the gathered warriors. Combat trials were serious affairs, often resulting in permanent injury or death. They were reserved for settling matters of honor between proven fighters. Vera started to object, but Ben raised his hand gently. "That's very kind of you to offer," Ben said to Crix. "But I'm afraid I must decline." The murmur grew louder. Several warriors exchanged glances of disbelief. "You refuse?" Crix demanded. "You refuse a formal challenge?" "I prefer to avoid violence when possible," Ben replied calmly. "Besides, I have work to finish in the archives today. The new artifacts from the northern excavation site require careful examination." Crix turned to face the other warriors, his voice rising. "Do you hear this? When offered the chance to prove his honor, the soft flesh chooses to play with old rocks instead." The laughter that followed made Vera's face burn with shame. She watched her husband's reaction, hoping to see some flash of anger or wounded pride that might lead him to accept the challenge. Instead, Ben simply nodded politely. "If you'll excuse me," he said. "Those artifacts won't catalog themselves." As Ben walked away, Crix called after him. "This is what you chose, sister. This is the mate you think worthy of a Kathari commander." Vera watched her husband disappear into the archive building, his shoulders straight but his pace unhurried. Around her, warriors whispered and pointed. She could hear fragments of their conversations. Soft flesh afraid of real combat. No warrior spirit at all. How can she respect him? Elder Mort approached her with a sympathetic expression. "Commander, perhaps it would be better if your husband returned to Earth for a while. Until the political situation stabilizes." "No," Vera said sharply. "Ben stays here. He is my husband and a member of this clan." "Then perhaps you could encourage him to at least try some basic combat training," Crix suggested. "Show that he respects our ways." Vera knew her brother meant well, but the suggestion stung. How could she ask Ben to be something he was not? Yet how could she continue to defend a choice that made her look weak to her own people? That evening, Vera returned to their shared quarters feeling exhausted. The day had been filled with questioning looks and whispered conversations. During the afternoon training session, she had caught two warriors making jokes about humans being too fragile for real fighting. She found Ben in their main room, sitting at a large table covered with artifacts from the morning's excavation. He had arranged them in careful rows, each one tagged and documented. His movements were precise as he cleaned centuries of dirt from what appeared to be an ancient sword. "How was your day?" Ben asked without looking up from his work. "Fine," Vera replied, though they both knew it was not true. Ben set down his cleaning brush and looked at her with those observant eyes. "I'm sorry about what happened this afternoon. I know it wasn't easy for you." Vera sat down across from him, watching as he returned to his work. The sword he was cleaning was clearly very old, its metal darkened with age but still showing the skilled craftsmanship of ancient Kathari weaponsmiths. "Why won't you even try?" she asked quietly. "Just one training session. Just to show them you're willing." Ben paused in his work. Would that really help? Or would it just give them something else to criticize? Vera had no answer for that. She knew her people well enough to know that Ben was probably right. His first fumbling attempts with a sword would only provide more material for their jokes. "This blade is remarkable," Ben said, returning to his cleaning. "The balance is perfect, and the metal composition is unlike anything in our modern weapons." Vera watched him work, noticing how naturally he held the ancient sword. His grip was relaxed but secure, his movements confident as he cleaned each section of the blade. For someone who claimed to avoid violence, he seemed surprisingly comfortable handling weapons. "Where did they find it?" she asked. "The Northern Temple Complex. It was buried with what appears to be a warrior of high rank, based on the other artifacts in the tomb. Ben held the sword up to examine it in the light. The blade caught the evening glow from their windows, revealing intricate patterns worked into the metal. Your ancestors were incredible craftsmen, he continued. This sword was made nearly 1,000 years ago, but the techniques they used are far more advanced than what most modern smiths can achieve. You seem to know a lot about swords for someone who avoids combat, Vera observed. Ben smiled slightly. I find the history fascinating. Each weapon tells a story about the people who made it and the person who carried it. As the evening progressed, Vera watched her husband work with the ancient artifacts. His movements were careful and respectful, treating each piece like a treasure rather than just an object to be studied. She began to see a different kind of strength in his patience and dedication. But would her people ever see it the same way? Late that night, after Ben had carefully stored all the artifacts away, Vera lay awake thinking about their situation. The political alliance between Earth and Kathar was important to both worlds, but it would not protect Ben from the growing resentment of her clan. Something would have to change soon, or the consequences could be severe for both of them. 3 days after the confrontation with Crix, Vera was leading the morning patrol when the warning bells began to ring. The sound echoed across the valley, sharp and urgent, calling all warriors to battle stations. She had heard those bells only twice before in her life, and both times had meant serious danger. "Commander," called Scout Rix as he ran toward her position. "The Zareth clan approaches from the eastern ridge. Full war party, at least 200 warriors." Vera felt her blood go cold. The Zareth clan had been rivals with her people for generations, but they had maintained an uneasy peace for the past 5 years. An attack now could only mean one thing: they saw the Kathari as weak and divided. "How long until they reach the outer defenses?" she demanded. 1 hour, maybe less, Rix replied. "They're moving fast and carrying siege equipment." Vera's mind raced through the tactical situation. Most of her warriors were scattered across the territory on routine patrols. Getting them back to defend the stronghold would take time they did not have. "Sound the recall horn," she ordered. "Get every available fighter to the main gates. Send runners to bring in the outer patrols, but tell them to move carefully. The Zareth may have set ambushes along the main roads." As Scout Rix ran to follow her orders, Vera headed toward the command center. The stronghold was built into the side of a mountain, with natural rock formations providing protection on 3 sides. But the eastern approach was more vulnerable, relying on constructed walls and defensive positions. She found Elder Mort already in the command center, studying maps with several other clan leaders. "How many defenders do we have ready?" Vera asked immediately. 60 warriors at full strength, Elder Mort replied. "Another 40 will arrive within the hour if the recall succeeds." Against 200 Zareth warriors, those numbers were not encouraging. The Zareth were known for their aggressive tactics and their willingness to accept heavy losses to achieve victory. "What about the civilians?" Vera asked. "Already moving them to the inner shelters," Elder Mort said. "Your human husband volunteered to help coordinate the evacuation." Vera felt a moment of surprise. Ben had never been involved in emergency procedures before, but apparently he had stepped forward without being asked. "Where is he now?" she asked. "The archives level, I think. He said something about securing important artifacts." Vera nodded and turned her attention back to the defense preparations. The next hour would determine whether her clan survived or fell to Zareth aggression. The attack began exactly as predicted. Zareth warriors poured down the eastern slope like a dark tide, their war cries echoing off the mountain walls. Vera stood on the main wall, watching their approach through her field scope. "They have siege towers," reported Captain Dex from beside her. "And climbing equipment. This is a full assault, not a raid." Vera could see the truth of his words. The Zareth had come prepared for a long battle. Their siege towers were massive wooden structures that would allow warriors to scale the defensive walls. Behind them came warriors carrying ropes, grappling hooks, and portable bridges. "First wave incoming," called a warrior from the gate tower. The battle began with a rain of arrows from both sides. Vera's archers were well trained and held good positions, but they were outnumbered. For every Zareth warrior that fell, 2 more took his place. "They're concentrating on the north gate," Captain Dex observed. "Trying to break through our weakest point." Vera made quick calculations. If she moved warriors to reinforce the north gate, the main entrance would become vulnerable. But if the north gate fell, the enemy would pour into the courtyard and the battle would be lost. "Take 30 warriors to the north gate," she ordered. "Hold them as long as possible." As Captain Dex led his fighters away, Vera watched the siege towers approaching the main wall. Each one carried dozens of enemy warriors, and they were protected by thick wooden shields that deflected most arrows. "Commander," called a voice from behind her. She turned to see Crix running toward her position, his armor already showing dents from the fighting. "The north gate is under heavy pressure," he reported. "Captain Dex needs reinforcements." Vera looked at her remaining forces. She had perhaps 20 warriors left to defend the main wall, and the siege towers were almost in position. "Pull back 10 warriors from the eastern tower," she decided. "Send them to Captain Dex." "That leaves us with barely enough fighters to hold the main wall," Crix pointed out. "I know," Vera replied grimly. "But if the north gate falls, the main wall won't matter." The next hour was a nightmare of constant fighting. Vera found herself moving from position to position, plugging gaps in the defense and rallying her warriors. The Zareth seemed to have unlimited numbers, while her own forces grew smaller with each passing moment. Then she heard the sound she had been dreading, the splintering of wood from the direction of the north gate. "Commander!" Scout Rix appeared at her side, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "The north gate has fallen. Enemy warriors are in the courtyard." Vera felt the battle slipping away from them. With Zareth warriors inside the stronghold, her defensive positions were compromised. Soon they would be surrounded and overwhelmed. "Pull everyone back to the inner courtyard," she ordered. "We make our last stand there." As her warriors began their fighting withdrawal, Vera found herself thinking about Ben. The archives were in the lower levels of the stronghold, hopefully far from the fighting. At least he would be safe while she and her warriors bought time for the civilians to escape through the mountain tunnels. The inner courtyard was smaller than the outer defenses, but it had the advantage of limiting how many enemy warriors could attack at once. Vera positioned her remaining 30 fighters in a defensive circle, preparing for what would likely be their final battle. "They're coming," called a warrior from the gate. Zareth fighters poured into the courtyard like water through a broken dam. Vera raised her sword and charged forward, meeting the enemy head-on. Around her, her warriors followed, their battle cries mixing with the clash of metal on metal. The fighting was brutal and desperate. Vera's training and experience kept her alive through the first minutes, but she could see her warriors falling around her. For every Zareth warrior they defeated, 2 more appeared to take his place. A massive Zareth fighter with ceremonial scars on his armor broke through the defensive line and came straight at Vera. His sword was enormous, requiring both hands to wield effectively. Vera barely got her own weapon up in time to block his first strike. The impact drove her to her knees. Her opponent was not only larger than her, but stronger as well. As he raised his sword for a finishing blow, Vera realized she had no defense left. Then she heard something impossible. The sound was like wind through metal, a soft singing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Her opponent paused, confusion crossing his features as he tried to identify the source. From the smoke and chaos of the battle, a figure emerged with fluid grace. Ben moved like water, the ancient sword in his hands tracing patterns in the air that were too fast for the eye to follow. The massive Zareth warrior turned toward this new threat, his great sword swinging in a powerful arc. Ben simply was not there when the blow arrived. Instead, he appeared at the Zareth warrior's left side, the ancient blade sliding between armor plates with surgical precision. The big fighter staggered and fell, his sword clattering on the stone courtyard. Vera stared in amazement as her husband faced the next group of attackers. This was not the gentle archaeologist she knew. This was someone else entirely, someone who moved with the confidence of a master warrior. "Ben," she called out, but he was already engaged with 3 Zareth fighters at once. What followed defied everything Vera thought she knew about combat. Ben's movements flowed from one technique to another without pause, each strike placed exactly where it would do the most good. He used the ancient sword like it was part of his body, the blades singing through the air with deadly precision. The Zareth warriors had trained their entire lives for battle, but they had never seen anything like this. Ben's fighting style was unlike anything in their experience. Where they expected strength, he used speed. Where they looked for aggression, they found calm precision. "What is he doing?" called Crix from somewhere behind her. Vera could not answer because she did not know. Every evening for months, she had watched Ben clean that ancient sword with careful, methodical movements. She had thought he was simply maintaining the artifact for historical study. Now she realized those movements had been something else entirely. Ben was not just cleaning the sword. He was learning from it. As she watched him fight, Vera began to see patterns in his technique. Some movements were clearly from human martial arts, but others looked familiar in a way she could not quite place. Then it hit her, they were Kathari techniques, ancient forms that had been carved into the ceremonial walls of their oldest temples. Ben had been studying their fighting traditions, learning not just from books but from the weapons themselves. Every night while she slept, he had been practicing forms that her own people had forgotten. The tide of battle began to turn. Zareth warriors found themselves facing an opponent who seemed to know their moves before they made them. Ben's ancient sword cut through their formations like they were made of air. But even as victory became possible, Vera could see that Ben was tiring. He was still human, still smaller and physically weaker than the warriors he faced. His incredible skill was keeping him alive, but it could not last forever against such numbers. She struggled to her feet, gripping her own sword tightly. Whatever happened next, she would fight beside her husband until the end. The battle was far from over, but everything had changed. The gentle archaeologist was gone, replaced by a warrior whose skills defied explanation. And Vera finally understood what real strength looked like. Vera pushed herself to her feet and ran toward the center of the battle where Ben fought with deadly grace. The ancient sword in his hands moved like liquid metal, each strike flowing into the next with perfect timing. She had never seen anything like it, not even among the most skilled warriors of her clan. A Zareth fighter broke away from the main group and charged at Vera with his spear raised. She met his attack with her own blade, their weapons clashing in a shower of sparks. Her opponent was skilled, but anger gave her strength. These invaders had threatened her people and forced her husband to reveal secrets he had clearly preferred to keep hidden. As they fought, Vera could hear the sounds of battle changing around her. The confident war cries of the Zareth warriors were becoming uncertain shouts and calls for retreat. Whatever Ben was doing, it was working. She finished her opponent with a quick thrust between his armor plates, then turned to see Ben facing the largest group of Zareth fighters yet. 7 warriors had surrounded him, their weapons creating a deadly circle. Any normal fighter would have been overwhelmed in seconds. Ben closed his eyes for a moment, his breathing slow and steady despite the chaos around him. When he opened them again, his entire stance had changed. The sword in his hand seemed to hum with anticipation. What happened next would be talked about in the clan halls for generations. Ben moved through the circle of warriors like he was performing a dance rather than fighting for his life. The ancient blade traced patterns in the air that seemed impossible, striking from angles the attackers could not predict or defend against. One by one, the Zareth fighters fell until Ben stood alone in the center of the courtyard, the ancient sword still singing softly in his grip. The remaining Zareth warriors looked at each other with growing fear. Their war leader, a massive fighter named Gorak, stepped forward with his ceremonial battle axe. "You fight well for a soft flesh," Gorak called out. But can you face a true Zareth champion? Ben said nothing, but his grip on the sword shifted slightly. Vera recognized the stance from the old temple carvings. It was called the Waiting Mountain, a defensive position used by ancient Kathari masters. Gorak charged with a roar that echoed off the courtyard walls. His axe whistled through the air in a strike that could have split a boulder in half. Ben stepped aside at the last possible moment, the ancient blade sliding along the axe handle to find the gap in Gorak's armor. The Zareth war leader stumbled and fell, his weapon clattering on the stone. Around the courtyard, the remaining attackers stared in shock. Their greatest champion had been defeated by a human who looked like he weighed half as much. "Retreat," called one of the Zareth captains. "Fall back to the ridge." As the enemy warriors fled the courtyard, Ben lowered the ancient sword and took a deep breath. His face was calm, but Vera could see exhaustion in the slight tremor of his hands. "Ben," she called, running toward him. He turned at the sound of her voice, and for a moment she saw the gentle archaeologist she had married. But there was something new in his eyes now, a confidence that had not been there before. "Are you hurt?" he asked, looking her over with concern. "I should be asking you that question," Vera replied. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Before Ben could answer, Crix appeared at her side with a group of surviving warriors. They all stared at Ben with expressions of amazement and respect. "Brother," Crix said formally, using the title reserved for honored clan members. "The clan owes you a debt that can never be repaid." Ben looked uncomfortable with the attention. "I just did what needed to be done," he said simply. "What needed to be done?" Crix repeated. "You defeated their best fighters single-handed. You saved the stronghold." Elder Mort arrived with the other clan leaders, all of them looking at Ben with new eyes. The gentle human who had been mocked just days before was now the hero of their greatest victory in years. "How is this possible?" Elder Mort asked. "Where did you learn such techniques?" Ben looked at the ancient sword in his hands, then at the gathered Kathari warriors. "Your ancestors were incredible teachers," he said finally. "They left lessons everywhere, for anyone willing to learn." "What do you mean?" Vera asked. Ben smiled slightly. "May I show you?" He led the group to the temple complex within the stronghold, where ancient carvings covered the walls from floor to ceiling. Vera had seen these carvings thousands of times, but she had always thought they were just decorative art telling stories of old battles. "These are not just pictures," Ben explained, pointing to a series of detailed panels. "They are instructional diagrams showing fighting techniques. Your ancestors created a complete martial arts system and carved it into the temple walls so it would never be lost." He moved to another section of the wall. "This panel shows proper footwork for fighting multiple opponents. This one demonstrates how to use an enemy's strength against them. And this one here shows the breathing techniques that allow a warrior to fight longer without tiring." The clan leaders stared at the carvings with new understanding. Knowledge that had been hidden in plain sight for centuries was suddenly revealed. "But how did you decode them?" Crix asked. "These carvings are ancient. The meanings have been lost for generations." "That is what archaeologists do," Ben replied. "We study patterns, compare different sources, and piece together information from multiple clues. The weapons I have been cataloging in the archives all show specific patterns that correspond to the techniques shown in these carvings." He gestured to the ancient sword still in his hands. "This blade, for example, shows marks that match exactly with the movements carved into the temple walls. By studying both together, I was able to understand how the techniques were actually performed." Elder Mort stepped closer to examine the carvings. "You learned our ancestral fighting methods from studying old weapons and temple art. And by practicing every night after you went to sleep," Ben admitted. "I did not want to embarrass myself or Vera by fumbling through techniques in front of experienced warriors." Vera felt a strange mixture of pride and guilt. While she had been questioning Ben's worth as a warrior, he had been working in secret to master fighting techniques that her own people had forgotten. "Every night?" she asked. "For how long?" Since our first week on Kathar, Ben replied. I knew your people valued martial skill, and I wanted to understand that part of your culture. I never intended to actually fight anyone, but I thought knowledge of your traditions might help me fit in better. Crix shook his head in amazement. You spent months learning our ancestral arts just to better understand us. Understanding different cultures is what I do, Ben said. Though I admit, I never expected the lessons to be quite so practical. Captain Dex arrived with a report on the Zareth retreat. They are withdrawing completely, Commander. Our scouts report they are already past the eastern ridge and moving back toward their own territory. Casualties? Vera asked. Minimal, thanks to the humans' intervention, Captain Dex replied, looking at Ben with obvious respect. Without his actions, we would have been overwhelmed. As the immediate crisis passed, the clan leaders began to discuss the broader implications of the battle. The Zareth retreat meant that other rival clans would think twice before challenging the Kathari again. But more importantly, the clan now understood that their human ally was far more capable than anyone had imagined. That evening, the clan held a victory celebration in the main hall. Ben was formally inducted as a full warrior of the clan, with all the rights and honors that the title carried. Warriors who had mocked him days before now sought his advice on fighting techniques. You realize what you have done, don't you? Elder Mort asked Ben during the celebration. You have given us back knowledge that was lost for centuries. The knowledge was never lost, Ben corrected. It was just waiting for someone to take the time to understand it. Later that night, Vera and Ben sat together in their quarters. The ancient sword lay on the table between them, cleaned and ready to be returned to the archives. I owe you an apology, Vera said quietly. I doubted you, questioned your worth, even felt ashamed of our marriage. Ben reached across the table and took her hand. You had no reason to believe I could fight. I deliberately hid that part of myself. Why? She asked. Why keep it secret? Ben considered his answer carefully. Among humans, we have learned that the greatest strength is often the ability to avoid fighting altogether. But I also knew that someday, violence might be the only option. I wanted to be ready if that day came. You could have told me, Vera said. I would have understood. Would you have? Ben asked gently. Or would you have worried that I was trying to prove something I did not need to prove? Vera had no answer for that, because she suspected he was right. If Ben had revealed his combat training earlier, she might have seen it as an attempt to win approval rather than a genuine effort to understand her culture. Humans are remarkable, she said finally. You see patterns and possibilities that we miss completely. Different species have different strengths, Ben replied. Kathari excel at direct action and honorable combat. Humans excel at adaptation and finding creative solutions to problems. And together? Ben smiled. Together, we are stronger than either species could be alone. Outside their window, the clan celebration continued long into the night. Vera could hear warriors telling and retelling the story of the battle, each version growing more elaborate. But she knew the real story was simpler and more profound. Her husband had not just saved the stronghold. He had shown both their peoples what was possible when different kinds of strength worked together. The gentle archaeologist and the deadly warrior were not different people after all. They were both part of the same man, the man she had been lucky enough to marry.